In 1985 at a Toys R Us, I had a big decision to make, and ultimately it would be decided by the box.
Three of them coming in, 20 degrees. Cut to the left, I'll take the leader.
There I was at the age of 7, standing in the Star Wars aisle with the shelves upon shelves of amazing Kenner toys and rows of figures. And my mom said, "You can buy a vehicle today." And little did I know that was because I was about to go to a really awful doctor's appointment. Shelves and shelves of Return of the Jedi vehicles with big red tags on them that were clearancing out because it was 1985. And just to the right, droids and Power of the Force. I could pick anything I wanted, but I wasn't sure what I needed to do because I was a kid who loved the Rebels. I wasn't as big on the Imperials when it came to a big win like this. You know, it was not often that you were allowed outside of a birthday or a Christmas gift to get something, of that size. So I was going to go for something I didn't have in the Rebellion. I had the X-Wing, I had the Y-Wing, I had the Falcon. I wanted a spaceship. The B-Wing and the A-Wing were the choices. I looked at the B-Wing, I looked at the A-Wing. I looked at the B-Wing, I looked at the A-Wing. The A-Wing was new for that year. It was in the Droids line. But the box wasn't just different because of a Droids logo versus a Return of the Jedi logo. It was because Kenner had changed their entire marketing strategy in 1985. No longer were they doing the amazing photography scenes that they used to put on the front of the boxes, which would show you what the toy actually looked like that you were getting inside. With Power of the Force in 1985, and with its companion lines, Droids and Ewoks, they went with an art-based style. So it was more dramatized, but it was also artwork. It wasn't the actual toy you were getting. It wasn't the object inside, which means with droids being animated and the artwork on all the boxes for all the figures and all the vehicles and mini rigs being drawn, as with the Star Wars Power of the Force line, I wasn't confident that I was going to be getting a vehicle that looked movie correct. I thought there was a distinct possibility, given the way the droids and Ewoks figures looked, that what was inside those boxes for vehicles was going to look identical to that. And I didn't have a lot of time to really make a decision. We had a doctor's appointment to get to in a few hours, and my mom was determining how long we got to stay. And she was being really generous, and I didn't want to squander that. So I looked up and I said, the B-Wing box, that was what was more familiar to me from a presentation perspective. It looked like the boxes and card backs of the toys I've been collecting for the last 2 years. That was the safe bet. The Droid's A-Wing was not. I knew what the A-Wing was in Return of the Jedi, but it wasn't in the Power of the Force line, and it wasn't in a Return of the Jedi box. And I said, I can't take that risk. I don't want a cartoony toy. And so I went with the B-Wing. Do I regret my decision? No, not in childhood overall. But from a collector's luck perspective, that kind of sucked to find out that I had missed out on an opportunity to get one of the most valuable toys in the entire line, given that I kept my childhood collection. So I had to hunt one of those down later as an adult collector. It would have been a lot less expensive to have to hunt down a vintage B-Wing than it was to hunt down a vintage A-Wing. And everyone talks about how a big part of marketing is curb appeal, and this was proof positive that was true. You see, in the beginning of the Kenner line, it was always photography of the toys on the boxes. Now, in the first few years of Star Wars toys, the strategy was, let's show the vehicles with kids playing with them. So they were usually on a neutral colored background on the box in the photography. Maybe a kid was in the photo, maybe they weren't. It depended on the size of the toy. Now, some of the toys would have photographic scenes, like the Land Speeder and the Dewback. But the big vehicles, they were just on neutral gradient colored backgrounds. But then with The Empire Strikes Back, they said, no, let's freshen up the box art on these. Let's do some more dynamic photography that creates scenes with the characters and the toy that's inside. So the X-Wing box became a Dagobah diorama. And then the Millennium Falcon box, which I think is the pinnacle of all Kenner photography, it became the Bespin landing platform scene from The Empire Strikes Back. They did some amazing diorama photography on these boxes that is unforgettable to any kid who grew up staring at these toys in a toy store. And that very much carried over to Return of the Jedi. However, when Power of the Force kicked off alongside the Droids and Ewoks lines for those animated series, they went with another strategy, and that strategy was artwork. Now, the artwork was excellent for Star Wars Power of the Force, understandably cartoony for Droids and Ewoks, but ultimately you weren't seeing what was actually in the box. And if you were a kid and couldn't get your hands on the box itself to see the photography on the sides, to see some of the photos they'd taken of the actual toy, you were kind of at a loss because that forward-facing image was all you were going to get. As an adult, and then with the internet showing up, you finally had photographs of these rare toys that you didn't get when you were a kid. And that included the A-Wing and the A-Wing box. And the first thing that jumped out at me when I started researching the A-Wing was, wow, the photos on the side aren't of droids figures with the A-Wing. It's photos of the Emperor and Last 17 figures with the A-Wing. And that was part of the whole confusing situation around the A-Wing in 1985. You had an A-Wing pilot that was part of that last run of Star Wars figures, but that A-Wing pilot also came in the droids line on a card back. Yet the A-Wing itself was only in a droid's box. And with the main graphic of the A-Wing being a drawing, or painting, or rendering, in front of an image that, funnily enough, was a production still of B-Wing models from the film, just putting that out there, you really couldn't be sure as a kid what you were looking at. Whereas when you were an adult and you had the internet and you could see photos of the toy out of the box, because again, it was difficult to get access to what this toy looked like when you were a collector before the internet, and definitely when you were a kid, you realized, oh, this was a movie-accurate vehicle. It didn't have any cartoony proportions or coloring on it whatsoever. You wouldn't have known that, or at least you wouldn't have been certain about that from the style of the droid's box itself. And then when you start to consider the photos that were on the side of the droid's box that had the Emperor and the Imperial Dignitary and the Imperial Gunner standing next to the A-Wing, you realize, one, I think the A-Wing pilot has just been captured by the Empire. That's weird. But I also immediately started to speculate, this A-Wing fighter was planned for the Star Wars Power of the Force line in 1985. This was not supposed to be a droid's toy. And if you look in the intro of Droids from the cartoon, you will see that there are A-Wings and B-Wings being shown. So this wasn't a situation where the A-Wing was purpose-made just for the droids line. In other words, they didn't decide to pull the A-Wing out and draft it up after Return of the Jedi because Droids was coming out. They seem to have already had this in motion for the 1985 Star Wars movie line. And then somewhere along the way, they must have thought that the Droids line needed a shot of adrenaline. And so they decided, well, let's put the A-Wing in there as the centerpiece vehicle to get kids excited. But the change in the packaging artwork strategy at the same time did confuse some of us. And I was one of those. So even after I acquired a vintage A-Wing, and one that came with the original box no less, I still have nothing but contempt for that box. It clashes with everything the A-Wing represents, both photographically on the sides of the box and for me as a Star Wars kid from the 80s. And I always wished, like the A-Wing pilot figure itself, where you could get him either on a 1985 movie card or a Droids card, that they had put this thing in two different boxes, so that you could have a box that fit with the rest of your Star Wars movie collection. Replicator Boxes comes along in the UK and starts doing all this masterful work on recreating the original boxes and the original inserts. And then a few years ago, I saw that he was offering a custom A-Wing box that looked like Star Wars Power of the Force from 1985 and not the Droids box. I was really excited. I meant to pick it up. I even exchanged a few emails with him. And then something in life got in the way, and I never quite pulled the trigger. Well, I was at Joe Fest this year, and I walked around the corner, and a vendor who was selling vintage Star Wars had this box on display, and it was the Replicator box from the guy in the UK. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I've been wanting this thing. And it was in beautiful condition, and I picked it up. And so now, the A-Wing is redeemed in my collection by having the proper box with the insert, which I don't even have for my original Droids box. But who cares anyway? It's the Droids box. Whatever. This is the way it was always supposed to look. You're not going to convince me otherwise. The photos on the original Droids box are damning in that regard, and I'm so happy to finally have this in my collection. And it redeems the A-Wing for me in so many ways. And the quality of the box is incredible. Replicator really does a great job. Perfect sort of sheen on the printing, vibrant colors, the correct format, the correct fonts. All of it is just bang on perfect. The insert inside is perfect. When I box this thing up, if I want to, I could store it in this Replicator box, no problem. And it's the exact same dimensions as the original Droids A-Wing box. He didn't change that either. So this is really exciting for me. I'm not really a packaging guy. I collect loose card backs when they're affordable. I have boxes for a lot of my Empire Strikes Back stuff and a few Jedi and Star Wars pieces. But it's really exciting, like truly exciting, to have a box that should have existed and Kenner just never did. You know, they had the movie A-Wing pilot figure card back, but no movie A-Wing fighter box. But now we do. There's one more packaging redemption I would love to have. I don't know if Replicator would be up for doing it. I know he's got the skills, and it's the 1983 Battle Damage TIE Fighter. Because when you see that TIE Fighter, and it's on that asteroid field box, and it came out pretty early in the whole 83 run of toys, I'm convinced that that was supposed to be an Empire Strikes Back toy, and it just didn't get ready in time. You know, because they refreshed the X-Wing to become a battle damaged variant, and that's when they redid that box to be Dagobah. I really want to see that battle damaged TIE Fighter box with an Empire Strikes Back logo. That would just seal the deal. But even if we never get that, this one right here, this one was the real missing link for the entire Kenner Star Wars movie run. But it doesn't have to be anymore. Replicator just barrel rolled right through that problem. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.